Okay, so nice to meet you all. And today we're going to talk about something regarding the bot communities. What are they talking about? What are their struggles? How they are trying to evade those detection techniques, and how they're trying to actually create tools for their fraudsters, like tools for fraudsters by fraudsters, and actually they're trying to utilize tools which are actually legit and making them become doing things that are not quite legit. So let's try the clicker. OK. It's a bit slow, but we can do it. So we're going to go over like 4 things. The first thing we're going to talk about is threat intelligence. This is actually regarding those communities, what they're talking about, what's happening behind the scenes of their communities. And then we're going to show a quick demo of what's a reverse engineering tool, because we know that they know we're looking at them. So it means that they have tools where they're using in order to find the things that we're trying to track, they're trying to detect, even the challenges we're making on them. And eventually, we're going to have a quick runner-up on some attack tool and the exploratory view of what's happening over there and what are they looking at. And yeah. So. Yeah. OK, so let's just begin with the first thing. Threat intelligence is, again, what's happening in the fraud community today. So we're going to show what's happening in those communities regarding what are they looking at, what are the security vendor, what is the mechanism behind the target's defense, what are the SDKs which are protecting those actual targets, and again, struggles and what's going on behind the scene in terms of chatter. So the first thing I want to show you, which is quite interesting to understand, we can make it. Yes, we'll make it. So the first and most important thing they're looking at, it's not actually the target which is they're attacking. They are not attacking TikTok. They are not attacking Chase Bank. They are not attacking Wells Fargo. They're actually attacking the security vendor which is protecting those targets. That means that they're not asking, what do I need to do in order to bypass Wells Fargo defenses? They're asking, who is protecting Wells Fargo, and how do I overcome it? So we have a few examples, actually, of what's happening over there. We can see an example of one big vendor, another big vendor over here. We can see that they're not just looking at the vendor which is really defending those targets. They're actually looking at the version of the SDK which is running in the backside of this vendor, which is protecting those targets. It means that they are aware that if this target, if that site is running 1.6, maybe it's different than 1.75, and I need to behave myself. I need to overcome a different features in those different SDKs. So it's really important to understand that they are quite aware of what's happening behind the scene, and I'm going to show you another fun example of what's actually happening. If you can see over here, they're actually looking at our release cycles. They're just actually watching. They have their own mechanism to see if, if we're looking at, we're just updating our SDK over one site, and we're like 1.7, and now we want to go over to 1.8, and we skipped 1.75, they maybe even have a laugh about that, and they will talk about our release cycle, our production behind the scene. So this is nice to see that some of them are actually looking at that. And if you can see over at the bottom, you can see that some things are actually interesting to them in terms of release cycles, because does anybody know which one runs only 1.7? Because I can't deal with 1.75. So this is actually important from their end. Another thing which is quite interesting to have a look at is what they're trying to look in terms of the actual scripts is running in the background of the target site. They're not just looking in terms of what things are running there and what is being collected on them, and they're trying to have a go, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. They're actually trying to do reverse engineering on the actual scripts, because I don't know if you are familiar with defense scripts or running in background of sites. I don't know if any of you tried to scrape, try to do login, credential stuffing. Maybe like sometimes in the past, I don't know, I know I tried, and it's quite hard to understand what scripts are running over there, and it's quite hard to understand what is being collected on over you. So over here, you can see that they're actually giving grades to obfuscation levels of different vendors. It means that I know that I can go over to one vendor, and I know it's easier than the other vendor. Maybe it's as hard as this vendor, but the hardest one is this one. So maybe you need to take a look at the very easy one and maybe try to do it first, or maybe try to solve the very hard one and maybe sell it to the highest bidder. So it's really good to understand that they're not just looking at what's being collected on them, they're actually trying to de-obfuscate those scripts. They want to know what fields are being collected on them, what challenges are being made to their browsers, because it's really hard to know what's happening behind the scene without understanding those codes and without seeing what's happening actually in terms of the security defender. This is a quite interesting look at what's happening in those forums. Again, all those pictures are taken from quite legit places over Discord servers. I heard that you talked about Discord just earlier, so this is the same thing. And as we can see here, those are 3 examples of scripts being de-obfuscated by those fraudsters, by those threat actors. And as you can see here, those quite few interesting fields, which is interesting to see. As you can see, the first one is plugins and MIME types. That's maybe vague for some people, but for those who try to evade those detections are really aware of them, and they know that those fields might suggest that something fishy is happening behind the scenes. And the second example, we can see that they're looking specifically at Phantom, WebDriver, DOM automation. Those are like fields that flag specifically that's happening automation behind the scene. Those are really good to know for the beginner fraudster, for the beginner bot attacker, but that's nice to see and nice to show that something is happening behind the scene. And the last script, it's actually quite nice. I don't know if you can read it, but that's being taken from an SDK of a security vendor. And I don't know if you can see, it's saying you can't hide. So it's quite funny, because you can't hide was supposed to be obfuscated and no one should read it, but now we can. So I don't know if you can hide is the right sentence for that. It's quite arrogant. OK. Let's talk about their struggles. So I want to have a quick, like maybe summarization of what do you think is a struggle which is a bot attacker is suffering from you, if you have any. OK. I'm going to give it maybe 10 more seconds. Cool. So as we mentioned earlier, what? Yeah, I can see. Authentication problems. So what do you mean by authentication problems?
I mean, to access all those services, you probably need an account.
What?
You probably need an account in order to access these services.
Yeah, so maybe the first step is actually, yeah, the authentication. They're having an account and they're trying to do those actual steps in order to see what's happening, what's the right flow of things which are happening. And this is a good point, because in order to scale up the operation, they want to do the first thing, the first try, and then take it and do it like multiple times. We're not talking about tens of times. We're not talking about thousands. We're talking about millions and maybe more. So I'm going to show maybe a nice picture of struggles which are happening over there. This is a good example of someone who is trying to bypass another security vendor, and he's talking about the techniques that he used, what was working for him, what wasn't working for him, how many times he were able to bypass those security methods, and people are making conversation over this. They're talking about, maybe you tried this one, maybe you tried the other one, maybe you should think about doing that or the other way around. And this is quite interesting to see that in those societies, in those communities, this is really a good part of sharing knowledge. They want to know, they want to teach each other, and maybe we'll mention it in the end, but they actually have a nice way of knowing that some of us, the security researchers, are actually lurking there, and sometimes they share a few snippets for us, but maybe, you know, one day they will switch sides or the other way around, and we don't know. So another example of something that's happening over there is someone, again, is trying to do Amazon sign-up details. They're trying to do it in a scaled way. They want to do it like in very massive. And he's getting 404. He doesn't know why. Everybody is trying to suggest maybe the reasons. And I don't know if you mentioned the last one. That's probably it, the reason. Maybe you're just using a bright mode color of IDE. I don't know. Maybe that's the reason why you can't actually pass it. That was a joke, I know. So let's just have a last talk of what's going behind the scenes of the attack. We're going to talk about some technical stuff just before we dig deep into the demo itself. So we're talking about detection techniques, what people are looking at, what is happening in terms of us, the security vendors, and what they are aware of, what they know is happening. So they know that people are tracking mouse speeds and click presses. They know that we have good WebDriver detection, and someone even says that when you have a WebDriver, and if you can't hide it, that's an immediate block. So in order to bypass those things, you need to be aware of them. You need to know how to mimic it. You need to know what's happening, what features you need to mimic. You need to have a good understanding of what's looking like a good user, what's looking like a human, and what doesn't. So up until now, we had a bit of discussions of what's going on in those communities. Right now, I'm going to show a quick demo of tools that were used for fraudsters by fraudsters. That's a good example of the good sharing spirit of those fraudsters. And this is quite interesting to see. I'm going to just go to my laptop. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to have quick two shows of two tools which are used by fraudsters for fraudsters. The first one is called anti-bot test. And just a quick understanding of what's happened in this tool. This is an actual script that was built by fraudsters in order to do a understanding of the targets and what's happening behind the scenes of the targets regarding the security vendors. Who is protecting it? What tools are they using? What scripts are they using? What they are collecting? And the second one, API sniffer, I think will be much more understood after I'll show the first one. So if we go to anti-bot test, this is, again, a Discord. I don't know if you have tried it in the past and you've seen it and how it looked like. So as you can see over here, this is filled with commands. And we can see here that I'm writing anti-bot and just a normal site. Doesn't matter actually what. And if we run it right now, we see that it's trying to analyze the site itself. It's going over all the JavaScript which is running in the background, and then eventually is putting out an output of who is protecting this site. What is the security vendors which is protecting this site, and not just who are they. You can actually see the addresses which are directing to the specific places where the scripts are located at. It means that if you are a technical person, you can go and take those scripts and then go and deobfuscate them, understand what type of features are being collected at you, what type of challenges are being made against the browser itself. And this is quite interesting to see, again, what's happening. Someone is writing hi over there. It's interesting. OK, the second one, which is a bit more technical, is quite different than the other one, which is very product-wide, very ready to be used, because you understand this one is being defended by this vendor and not that vendor. And this is really easy to understand, because if I know how to bypass a specific vendor, I know that if this vendor is defending this target, I can use it. But if I don't know, I can just go on and have my next target. So this script is a bit more fluffier in terms of it just returns the specific API calls which are getting collected from all the JavaScripts on the site. It doesn't actually does the actual classification of which script is related to which security vendor, because some scripts are not trying to detect bots. Some scripts are just trying to understand the current flow of what's happening in your site. Some scripts are actually being used by the site owners themselves and not related to security at all. So here you can see that this actual tool is doing. Wait, this is not anti-bot. We need to do a different just API sniffer, because this is the tool. Or just one. Why? No. So. Okay. Okay. I'm going to show you just maybe an output of something else, because it's quite difficult to write it on the other screen. So I'm going to show you something which is interesting to see, maybe on some other target which is interesting to see. So maybe if we go and look on Footlocker. This one is a script I actually ran yesterday. And we're looking at the actual output of this tool and what's happening on the background. And we can see here the specific API requests that were asked by all the scripts that were running on that site itself. So if we go and have maybe a bit of wandering around, we can eventually we look at the scripts that are coming from something that's happened to be a security vendor. I will show one which is like CloudFront. And this is actually interesting to see that what's happening behind the scene in terms of what type of fields are being collected, what API calls are being made from the security vendor. This is interesting to understand, because you don't need to deobfuscate the script itself in order to see what API calls are being collected by the script itself. So it's actually a work in progress together in order to understand better what's being collected on you, the threat actor who is trying to mimic the human interaction. So let's do another quick demo, which is, again, going to be. So the next one is about attack tools exploration. And I'm going to call it attack tools. I don't know if any one of you are familiar with Puppeteer as an attack tool or not, but Puppeteer in general is a good automation tool which is meant usually for developers in order to automate things, in order to understand how their site acts in terms of sometimes Chrome Atlas, sometimes just usual Chrome, and just for developer purposes, and this is a legit tool. But as we know, when someone making a good legit tool which is helping you automate things, fraudsters and threat actors can utilize this tool and try to take it and scale it up and make it as an attack tool. So as we can see here, the Puppeteer actually is flagging, I'm an automation tool. And as you can see, or you can figure that if you are flagging that you are an automation tool, it's not very good for the threat actors. So you need a way to overcome this. You need a way to evade those things. So I'm going to show you just a quick wandering around this tool, again, from the fraudsters community. So this is Puppeteer Extra. I don't know if you are aware of this repo, but it has 4,000 stars, has many, many contributors, and it's really being maintained almost daily. As you can see, some of the last PRs were like 8 days ago. So this is really cool to see. And if we go specifically into the tools that I was mentioning, because as I mentioned earlier, we want to make a plugin for this tool that will make it evade the bot detection. They want a tool that won't flag you as an automation tool. So as you can see here, this is the Puppeteer Extra Stealth. They are bragging and going into a specific site which is supposed to recognize bots, and you're seeing you're not Chrome headless. And if we go a little bit further, they're talking about the specific evasions they added. Maybe we'll go into that a bit later. Test results without Puppeteer. So we're seeing bad is very bad. And then we're going with Puppeteer, and we're seeing they're all green. Again, this is very common knowledge for the bot detection community. Maybe if you want to get into that deeper, I will gladly share a bit about this. And another thing here is reCAPTCHA v3. I don't know if any of you have tried reCAPTCHA, but the latest reCAPTCHA, which is supposed to be seamless, if you have a score which is usually lower than 0.5, it means that you are a bot. Without using Puppeteer Extra Stealth, you're getting 0.1. With using all the stealth evasion techniques, you are getting 0.7, which is actually kind of good, and it's being usually considered a human or maybe some network fault. So before we go and have a little bit look about the evasions here, we can have a clear look on what's being considered as evasions. So maybe you remember earlier from when I talked about specific plugins or WebDriver or other properties of the browser itself, which are mentioning that you are using automation at the moment. As you can see here, we have all kinds of evasions which are meant to actually remove those features. And if we can go into the, for example, WebDriver, we're looking here at evasion, which is actually passing the WebDriver test. This will delete the navigator.webdriver property. It will take the navigator.webdriver and will delete it, and which means eventually you will look as a human, as a normal browser. So to sum it all up, we're going to go OK, so we have best practices. I'm going to just do a quick all of them. So threat intelligence, as you can know, we need to have an ongoing presence in the right places. You need to understand what tools are being used in order to evade your bot detection. You need to have hands-on the tools being used. This is in order to trace them out of your traffic and in order to find them. And the latest one, you need to always try to bypass your own systems. And this is, of course, I know you are aware of, if you're trying to bypass your own systems, you will probably discover interesting findings or loopholes that were happening in the mid. This is it. Thank you all.